The nice thing about doing this workshop in person is that it's easier to call on people. All right, it's 1:15, so let's go ahead and get started. So this is part for underrepresented Drupalists. I'm Alana Burke, and we're going to be going over some new content today. As usual, we'll go over all the slides first, and then we'll use the remaining time to work on writing your bio. And then if you'd like, you can come over to the Drupal Diversity and Inclusion booth, where we can continue with an informal working session to work on either writing your bio, any of the things we worked on in the first two parts, or if you missed any of the parts, we can work on that, or just talk about anything about speaking in general. I'm more than happy to go over anything, answer questions, give any advice. We're also going to be having a contrib day tomorrow. So if you would like to join in the DDI contrib, and I will have a link for that, and you want to work on creating a talk, you are more than welcome. Okay. Writing a bio. It is everybody's least favorite part. It is so awkward to write about yourself and also to write in the third person. But you've got to have one, so let's get it done. When you submit a proposal to a or pitch to an event, you will almost always be asked to include a short bio. This is sometimes harder than writing your entire talk, but here are some. It should be written in the third person. It should be succinct but descriptive, only a short paragraph. Economy of words. Say the most you possibly can with the fewest possible words. Mention what your position or job is and any credentials that might be relevant. So you might want to tailor this a little bit to your talk. So if you're, for example, giving a talk on DevOps, you have some DevOps credentials, mention that. This can be helpful for both the attendees, but also sometimes to the curators and the people on the program team. You know, if I'm looking, I've previously been the person I've been the track chair for the development track. And sometimes I want to know, like, is this person a subject matter expert? Do they know what they're talking about? So if I know what this person's job is and what they do, that information for me. Mention how many years you've been in this field, or if it hasn't been that many, tell a short story about how you ended up in this field. Look at past examples for the conference you're submitting to. See how people write their bios, and why are you the right person to give this talk? Make sure you humanize it, though. Drupal camps, as we've mentioned before, and DrupalCons are not super. So you don't want to sound like a robot. You don't want this to sound like some super executive. Keep it a little funny. Add your non-professional interests. Don't make it your entire bio. I'm going to read mine so you can get an idea. So here's my current bio. After 10 years as a backend developer, Alana decided a change was in order. Still carrying a torch for Drupal, content management systems, and helping others, she's now working trainer and developer advocate at Amazy.io. Alana also serves as a track chair for DrupalCon North America, is on the leadership of Drupal Diversity and Inclusion, and serves the Drupal Community Working Group as an ambassador to Drupal Diversity and Inclusion. The proud owner of many pets, including 7 guinea pigs, she's also very involved in animal rescue. So in that, I tell you how long I've been doing this kind of work, that I'm involved in the Drupal community, what I like to do, what my job is, volunteer work I do, and in telling all that volunteer work, I basically am able to tell you all of my interests. And then at the end, I tell you that I love animals, which is really important to me. So we'll take a stab at our bios at the end of the talk, but just kind of think about this and see if you can start sort of generating your bio in your mind. Let's talk speaker. The most important thing you can do to become a better speaker is to practice. The more you speak, whether it's in front of a mirror, in front of friends, or in front of a room full of people, the more comfortable you'll become. You Give a talk to a friend or a coworker over Zoom or Skype or FaceTime. You can also video record yourself, take notes on the behaviors that you exhibit speaking, and then practice reducing. When you practice, time yourself. About how long or short your talk is when you're speaking out loud, and it's important to know how long your talk is going to take. I know that is a major one for me. I tend to talk very, very quickly, and I need to know if I'm going to take up the time that I have allotted. It can also be important to make sure that you don't talk, that your talk is going to fit in the time that you have allotted if you're going to have time for. I definitely one year did not test my talk for time, but I was really happy with the content. And when I finally rehearsed it out loud the night before, it was nowhere near long enough, and I did not have the time to rework my talk, and I didn't really want to. Happily, that worked out, and we had the best Q&A session I've ever had, but I would have preferred to not be panicking the entire time and thinking that my talk was way too short. So don't do that. Looking for opportunities to practice speaking. See if there's a Toastmasters in your area. They'll provide you with a lot of opportunities to speak in front of supportive groups of people and give you tips and tools for improvement. I do not know what virtual Toastmasters look like, but I'm gonna assume it is still a thing. Same with Drupal meetups. I know that the one Drupal meetup I'm involved with went virtual. No big deal, they just do it on Zoom instead. So look on Meetup. Most meetups present for 5 to 10 minutes, and it's a great way to just get used to speaking. Some do's and don'ts. No matter how much public speaking experience you have, there's always room for improvement. Do. Speak slowly. Many speakers speak too fast, but audiences almost never complain that someone went too slowly. Take pauses in between sentences. It natural to the audience. Like I said, this is one that I still struggle with. Have water available and drink it. Most events will provide water for the speaker, but make sure that you have water on hand just in case. When you find yourself going too fast, taking a drink of water is a really great way to slow yourself down. It might feel like it takes forever to take a drink, but the audience doesn't mind. In person, this is my best tactic for slowing down. It doesn't affect me as much speaking virtually. I don't feel the same way. I think especially when you're speaking in front of people, your heart rate's a little elevated, and then that makes you speak more quickly. And I know that my mouth starts to get a little dry. So I will even sometimes in my slides, in my speaker notes, put down something like, take a drink of water. Vary your voice. This gets easier with practice. So make sure you'll have some inflection in your tone. When program coordinators look at the videos that we ask people to submit for DrupalCon, that's the kind of thing that we want to see. We don't want someone who is just droning, who isn't interesting to listen. We want someone who is engaging, whose voice is interesting, who's fun to listen to. Look at your whole audience. Again, this one doesn't really work for virtual audiences, although I do try to look at the camera and make sure that I'm not just like looking off in space somewhere in my office. But when you're in person, make eye contact with people if you can, but make sure that you're scanning the whole room and not just looking at one part of the audience. One trick here is to locate some friendly faces in the audience and then sort of make a loop each one of those faces. A trick for theater, when you're looking out at the audience, is to look at the back of the room. If you could just kind of look at the doors, it will look like you're looking at the audience, but you are actually just looking at the back wall. Make sure the audience can hear you. If you aren't sure whether the mic or your voice is loud enough, just ask the audience if they can hear you. Ask the people in the back to raise their hands if you get too quiet. This is important, as well as making sure that you're speaking into the microphone, because we record talks And the microphone also has to do with accessibility. If you're using any kind of live captioning, or if people are counting on being able to, listen to the talks later, make sure that people can hear you and that you're speaking into the microphone. Keep your hands above your waist. This one I see guys doing more, women, but don't put your hands in your pockets. Don't, grasp onto the podium. This is another thing that gets lost a little in virtual talks. Like, I am gesturing, but you're probably only seeing tiny little bits of my hands because most people don't gesture in front of their face. But if you keep your hands sort of loose and not holding on to anything, most people will find themselves gesturing naturally, which makes you more engaging and more interesting. To breathe. This one goes along with, not speaking too quickly and drinking water. And sometimes you might even have to write yourself a speaker note, but make sure that you're not just going and going and going without taking a breath. And also consider practicing without notes. So even, if you want to have your speaker notes with you to make you less nervous, think about practicing your talk without some notes. Help you map your content to your thought process. So you probably already know your subject matter, so don't try to memorize your notes and script verbatim. This will help your talk sound more natural and will help you to feel better about deviating from your script. So for something like this, that's a training that has so much speaking that I have to do, I'm obviously going to have a lot more notes and be doing a lot more reading of them. I'm also an experienced speaker, so I'm not too worried that it's going to seem like I'm reading from my notes. But for a different talk, I would make sure that I have a lot fewer notes and that I'm speaking a lot more sort of off the cuff. And also, very importantly, turn off your phone and your notifications. On the device that you're presenting with, you obviously want to turn off notifications, close all your other applications so there's nothing distracting you. Turn off your phone so that it's not buzzing in your pocket. Accidentally just left my and people were tweeting about my talk, so my phone was buzzing in my pocket because people were enjoying the talk, which was great, but it was buzzing in my pocket, which was not great. So you don't want any distractions while you're actually talking. And some don'ts. If you are someone who gets jittery, do not drink too much coffee. Jittery from nerves. You don't want too much of a buzz on top of it. It will also probably make you talk even faster. Don't turn away from the audience. If you want to point out something in your slides, do it more like a weather person, gesture like this. You could quickly turn back, but don't turn your body. And I just said as I went to the next section, which is don't use. You might not notice that you're doing this, so ask a friend to point it out in a rehearsal or record yourself. To break your habit of using filler words, take a breath or a sip of water instead. A lot of people are going to wind up doing this. As long as you're not doing it between every other word, it's not going to be the biggest issue, but do be aware if you're doing it constantly. And don't read your slides or your notes directly. Make sure you're engaging and ad lib at least a little bit. This is another thing that in virtual talks versus in person is going to be a little different. You can't really tell that much how much I'm reading because I'm going to be looking at my screen either way. You're not going to really expect me to be staring into the camera the whole time. And there's only about an inch of difference between staring into the camera and staring at my notes. But it's very, very obvious in person if you're staring at your notes versus looking at the audience. So don't get used to it. Handling nerves. This is most people's biggest fear about public speaking. It is a part of being human. It's hardwired. For our caveman ancestors, anytime more than 5 pairs of eyes were looking at them at once, it probably meant they were about to die. So we still react that way when we get up in front of a group of people and see them all watching at us. But keep in mind that your audience is on your side. And all of them would be nervous if they were in your shoes. It's okay to admit that you're nervous. People will be sympathetic. Think of all the talks you've ever seen and the things that you've seen go wrong, or the mistakes or things that people have misspoken. You've never thought, wow, I want to throw a tomato at that person. They're the worst. You've just felt sympathetic for them. And that's how people will feel for you. Can do to help soothe you. Practice. It really does get easier with practice. The more you practice, the better you know your material will be and the more confident you will be. Sleep. I know a lot of people don't sleep at DrupalCon, but if you are well rested, you will do a better job. Resist the urge to network or socialize too much the night before. I have missed many an amazing party because I have gone straight home to my hotel room after the last session of the day before. For some people, exercise is a great way to get rid of nervous energy. If you're the kind of person who, sort of paces back and forth or just can't get rid of that energy, go to the gym that morning and burn off that energy. Physiologically, the reason you get so nervous is so that you will have the energy and adrenaline to fight or flee from your predator. So running or some other kind of exercise, burn off that nervous energy and convince your body that the danger is over. And breathe, meditate, take some time. When we get nervous, we tend to take shallow breaths into our chest. This is a part of the body's preparation for fight or flight, and it actually deprives the brain of some of its important oxygen. Take long, slow breaths into your belly, and this will help you calm and clear your mind. Before getting on stage, when you're on stage, before you start talking, and every so often during your talk. I make sure that I don't do anything right before my talk. If at in-person conferences, I usually skip the session before my own talk to make sure that I'm just clearing my mind. I'm sitting quietly, just relaxing, not doing anything else. I can just breathe and not be stressing out. Dress comfortably. Being body conscious never helps, so make sure you're comfortable in whatever you are wearing. I always wear my absolute favorite outfit, something that makes me feel awesome, that I think I look awesome in, that is just super comfortable, like my very favorite pair of jeans, down to my favorite pair of socks and underwear. So that just favorite outfit that you have, wear that. And this goes back to what I just said before, take time for yourself before you speak. This helps you compose yourself and get mentally prepared. Go for a walk, listen to some favorite music, go over your notes, sit quietly, take some deep breaths, whatever works for you. And get to know the stage. So virtually, we had a whole lot of different so that we could see how everything worked, and we didn't have to be stressed out about whether things would, screen sharing would work. We permissions, make sure everything was operating correctly before we actually had to come in and present. In person, try to find a time before you give your talk to see the room where you'll be speaking, see how the podium is set up, see where you're going to come in, where you're going to put your device, just so you're comfortable with it and it's not the. And use your own devices. If you're using your own laptop, your own clicker, you'll be way more comfortable with your equipment. If for some reason this is a conference where you're not using your own devices, come early to ensure that you're able to rehearse, make sure that everything is set up exactly the way you want it so that you can use it with ease and it's not the first time you're seeing it. And this one is one that works for a lot of people, including me. Adopt a persona. This doesn't mean don't be yourself. It means be the speaker version of yourself. For example, if you tend to talk with your hands when you're nervous, embrace that and make it part of your speaker persona. You'll behave differently when you're in front of a big group of people. Go with that and don't fight it. So normally, I am kind of an introverted, quiet person. I would normally tell people people, I don't tend to go out. I stay in my house. I like to hang out with my pets, and that's about it. But I was also a theater kid, so I'm all pretty used to being able to kind of flip that switch. So when I go to events and things, I'm already used to kind of flipping a switch where I'm like, okay, it's event Alana time. So event Alana is friendly and extroverted, and she talks to people and she gives talks and she isn't nervous about it. So if you kind of think of it that way, it can help you to sort of get out of your head a little bit and not worry about it so much. It also helps me just at conferences in general to not get exhausted. So sometimes I have to switch out of that mode and be like, nope, I'm in introvert mode and I need to sit down and just look at my phone and have a study. But it can be really helpful for some people as speakers. And be excited. Nervousness is often actually excitement. There's no chemical difference between being excited and anxious. It's the same physical state. So if you think you're nervous, try turning it around and remind yourself that you're just excited. And finally, for virtual talks, make sure that you have secured a quiet and I know this is really hard. I have had lots of guinea pig squeaks. I have had my dog's nails clattering. I have had my mom who lives with me opening the door at the bottom of the stairs and calling my name. Stuff happens, but do your best to try and find yourself a space where you won't be interrupted. Next up, handling Q&A and discussions. Another one that a lot of people First, ask the organizers in advance what the expectations are. Try timing your talk when you rehearse it and make sure that you've left room for an adequate amount of Q&A time if that's something you'll be expected to do. How much time should you allow for Q&A? If the organizers haven't specified this for you, it usually depends on the length of your whole session. In general, 10 minutes is about adequate. For example, if your whole presentation 5-minute slot, you might want to allow about 35 minutes for the presentation and 5 minutes for questions, or 5 to 10 minutes for questions. Some people prefer to take questions throughout their talk rather than holding them to the end. Let your audience know upfront what you prefer, bearing in mind that if your audience will be using a microphone due to the size of the room or the fact that your talk is being recorded, you'll need to give the room technician a heads up about your Q&A plans so that they're ready with the audience. If it's a virtual conference and you're answering questions from chat, make sure to read out the questions. And don't forget to ask for questions. If you're saving Q&A until the end of the talk, don't forget to do it once you've finished. To remind yourself, you can add a slide at the end of your talk saying thank you and ask for questions. And repeat the question back to the audience. Even if the audience has a microphone, I often repeat the question. People sometimes don't speak super clearly, and it gives me a chance to think about my answer to the question and make sure that I've understood the question correctly. Tricky questions. Often speakers who are brand new to public speaking, and even ones that aren't, are nervous about getting asked a question that they don't know the answer to or that has a tricky answer. There are a few ways to handle that situation. To the audience, buys you a little bit of time to think about how to handle it, but don't be afraid to admit that you don't know. The audience will have far more respect for you if you admit that you don't know it than if you try to fudge it and you fail. You could say something like, "That's a good question. I'm not sure about the answer. Could you send me a tweet or email after the session and I could look into it for you?" You can also say that you don't have, or that it's not something that you're focusing on. You can throw it back to the audience and say, "Hey, that's a great question, but I'm not actually sure. Does anyone here know what the answer is?" You could throw it to a colleague in the audience. Say, "Hey, that's a great question. You know, my colleague Jane actually just worked on that in a project. Hey, Jane, do you have any ideas on this one?" And of course, you can offer to talk about it later in the hallway or on Twitter and just And there are a handful of different kinds of tricky questions, so we'll go over a few of them. Sometimes you get the smarty pants who thinks that they know better than you and goes on and on. It doesn't happen too often in our community, but if it does, it's one thing to keep in mind that these sorts of situations, other people in the audience are also thinking about how much of a know-it-all that person is, and they're not thinking about how you're handling it. Don't be afraid to cut someone off if they're monopolizing, derailing it. So just do it politely but firmly and say, I think we're going to have to move on now because time is running out and I really want to get a few more questions in. This is especially useful in situations of, this is more of a comment than a question, but, and I have seen some very brave speakers cut them off right there and say, well, we're only taking questions right now, so let's hold the comments for the hallway. It's fantastic. Unrelated questions. Sometimes people ask questions that have little or nothing to do with your talk, and answering the question will completely derail a conversation. One way of handling this is to just say, that's a good question, but it's outside the scope of what we're talking about. I'd be happy to answer it for you privately after. Sometimes when you finish your talk, you throw open the floor to the audience and there are no. It's totally okay. Sometimes there aren't any questions. Maybe your talk was really in depth and you answered everyone's questions. Maybe it was just a really great talk and everyone's just kind of digesting. You never know. You could have one or two people you know in the audience ready to ask a question or chime in with a different angle. I pretty much always ask my friends to come to my talks and I go to my friends' talks. If this ever happened, I would totally raise my hand and ask something. You could also go ahead and answer or ask your own questions and say something like, something I didn't go into depth in the talk, but that you might have been wondering about is, or a question I've had come up before is. You could also ask the audience a question. See if there's something that relates to your talk and say, I talked about XYZ. Has anyone ever dealt with that before? And you can always wrap. Questions isn't always bad, and sometimes folks are happy for the extra time in between sessions. Errors. They happen. Don't be afraid to correct errors after your talk. If someone points out an error, either during the Q&A or later, go ahead and update your presentation online and include the correction if you gave the same talk again. Just verify that the correction is accurate before doing this. Just because someone corrects you doesn't mean that. Getting post-talk feedback. Make sure that you tell people how to connect with you and where to find your slides. We often forget this part of the process, but getting feedback after your talk is really important if you want to get better at public speaking. You want to get feedback about both your content and your speaking style. You want feedback about whether your content was interesting, well organized, easy to follow, etc. This is true whether you plan to ever give this or not, because a lot of the knowledge gained can be generalized. You also want to know about your speaking technique. How is the pace, volume, approachability, etc. Ask conference organizers if they send out a survey and whether you can see your own feedback. For conferences like DrupalCon, this is already arranged for you. Ask people you know who are there for feedback. The more specific your questions, the better their feedback will get. Don't just ask your friends and colleagues, what did you think? Because they'll probably say it. Ask them something like, do you think there was something that I could have done better? Could you hear me? Did I speak too quickly or too slowly? Keep in mind that asking people for feedback directly will be different from asking organizers for the feedback that was sent to them. People tend to be softer and kinder when speaking to you, as opposed to when they think that their feedback is only going to organizers. And also make sure that you take the anonymous feedback that you get from conference organizer surveys with a grain of salt. I've gotten feedback that makes me wonder if people even came to my talk, or weird feedback that had almost nothing to do with anything. I've gotten, I think I mentioned yesterday that I got weird critique about a talk title once. People are going to give you weird feedback. It's okay. Don't take it to heart if it's something that you just don't think applies to you. But if several people said they talked too fast, or I didn't think they had a good grasp of the material, then that's when you should make sure that feedback. Let's talk about creating great slides. Slides are a huge part of your presentation. Make sure you give your slides a theme. It could be that you illustrate all your points with lolcats, or that they all use the same background and typography. Whatever it is, having a visually unified deck makes all the difference. Many speakers end up with a look to their slides that they stick with. This is great and makes their talk stand out and feel part of it. It may not be the route you want to go, but it's something to consider. Sometimes I make my own theme. Sometimes I just use the DrupalCon theme. Sometimes I use a theme that my company makes up. It depends on how I'm feeling. This time around, I used the DrupalCon theme because I thought it was pretty and I didn't really have the time to come up with another theme. As long as it's readable and I think that's fine. Don't use a default slideshow theme, like some of the really terrible templates that come with Keynote or PowerPoint. We've seen them 1,000 times and they look generic and boring. Don't write out what you're going to be saying. This can be a flexible rule for useful, important quotes. Nobody likes someone reading from lines from a slide. Readable. Think of the person sitting at the back of the room. Try to use 24-point font and larger when you can. I try to put as little text on the slide as I can and make the text as big as humanly possible. Check your contrast on a range of screens to make sure it will be legible. Stand as far away from your computer as you can. Can you read them? If not, change it. I usually take my computer downstairs and we have like a kitchen, and I put my computer on the kitchen table and I go all the way to the other end of the room and see if I can read it. Make sure that you're also considering your color choices. You can check your color contrast using an online tool to make sure it'll be easily readable. Plug in your color codes and the tool will tell you if it's in the acceptable range. We think of accessibility a lot for websites, but make sure you're also thinking about it for use readable fonts, please. Don't use a fancy font that is cute but unreadable, and don't use too many fonts together. This is yet another reason to use a pre-made professional looking theme. Make sure you're creating your slides for the right screen size. Find out in advance what aspect ratio the projector will have. Stay away from the edges of the screen to be safe. Information out of those areas. Use code sparingly. It's hard to sit through pages and pages of code on a screen. Use only what you need and make it readable. Break it up into smaller chunks if you need to. This would be way too much code to actually express any kind of idea on a slide. Include a slide at the end of your deck. You can also use a closing slide to remind you to do your Q&A. Check the copyright on your images. If you're using a Creative Commons graphic, make sure to give proper attribution to its creator. But also use images to add humor. I like to make sure I add animal images of some kind to all of my decks. Usually there's a guinea pig in there. And some more tips. If you are working for a virtual conference, use an external monitor. You can also practice going through your deck using an external monitor. So just use your presentation mode just like you would in the actual conference. You could also think about bringing your notes printed out on paper just in case something happens. Set up in presenter mode, so then you have a hard copy of your notes. Always bring a backup of your slides with you, whether that's on your phone, a thumb drive, have them saved as a PDF somewhere on your computer in case the internet is wonky. I usually have so many versions of my slides. I have them in Google Slides. I have them saved to my computer as a PDF. I have them saved to my phone, just in case anything I've never had to use any of them, but they're saved everywhere. Upload your slides before your talk if possible, and then include a link to them at the end of your slides. I often do this at DrupalCon, and I make sure I upload them either right before or right after my talk. There are also services where you can upload your slides, like SlideShare and SpeakerDeck. Remember to tweet out the link afterwards and send it to the event organizers if you're going to be speaking often. Invest in a presentation clicker to advance your slides without having to use the keyboard or mouse. It lets you step away from the podium and keep your hands in a more natural position and makes you less inclined to just stand there reading your slides. And a warning about live demos. It can be very tempting to do a live demo and hop back and forth between your demo and the slides. First of all, this can be hard to watch, especially the demo, which it almost always will. Consider recording these bits instead and embedding the videos with your presentation. Or if you can't record them and embed them, think about if there's a way for you to sort of fake your demo so that you're not really doing it live, but it sort of looks that way. Okay, so we still have about 10 minutes. And the homework, have any more classes, is to write your bio. So I'm just going to send you the link to the document that I have written up for you. And I would love for you to spend the next 10 minutes working on your bio. Well, about 8 minutes. But I would also love first to answer any questions that you have. I'm going to mention, as before, we're going to have a working session right after this in the DDI booth, because we won't have much time to work on the bio, and I think that's really important. We'll just chat. You can, chat video or just use the regular booth chat if you like. Either is fine. And there are a bunch of places where you can get help with your talks in general anytime. So on the Drupal Slack, we have DDI session help, which we've made specifically for underrepresented folks who went. We also have just a regular session help channel, which is for absolutely anybody. And we have our diversity and inclusion channel, of course, as well. We have weekly meetings there on Thursdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. And Drupal Diversity and Inclusion is the group that has organized these trainings. And I would love to hear, success stories and progress from everyone who's taken this training. Did you wind up speaking? Did you submit somewhere? Did anything come out of it? So if you would, if you'd want to keep in touch and join these channels, I would super appreciate that. And of course, we can help you as you move forward into becoming a speaker or improving your speaking. And as I mentioned earlier, we're also going to have Contrib Day. That's tomorrow. I didn't put the link in here. I don't know if I might not have had the link. The link for our Contrib Day is here. So basically, we're just going to meet up in Slack tomorrow, and then we'll spin up some Zooms and work on all sorts of different things. And like I said, you're also welcome to come and work on your sessions. I would absolutely love to help anyone who wants to work on that. So if you have any questions, please ask them now. If you want to see the guinea pigs, we can also do that. And otherwise, please work on your bios, and hopefully I will see you over in the DDI booth. All right, we have a request for guinea pigs. I can do questions and guinea pigs. This is Marilyn. She is one of my very first guinea pigs. And she is the mom of two of my other guinea pigs. She is Audrey and Grace's mom. And she is an Abyssinian guinea pig. And she's very sweet and motherly and sort of takes care of all the other guinea pigs. And the guinea pigs have heard a lot of my talks. My guinea pigs, my cat, mom, they've all heard my talks. She is a pretty big floof. She's probably one of my bigger pigs. They think you're beautiful. She's very sweet. She's a very good cuddler. If I put her on my chest, she will just snuggle right into my neck. If I'm sad, she's the one who always cheers me up. So how are you all feeling about speaking now? Do you feel like you're going to take all of this information and go and work on a session and submit it somewhere? It's going to be a lot of virtual events throughout this, at least this next year, I would say. I am absolutely sure that you can find something interesting to report. If you're a developer, that means that you have on working with, you might be just the right person to do some kind of intro or beginner or one-on-one talk, which people are always in need of, people are always asking for. I find that camps need beginner talks a lot because a lot of beginners start at camps. That maybe someone's starting to use Drupal because their work is using Drupal and they're like, oh, here's this Drupal camp that's in our town, so you should go to that and learn how to do Drupal. Turns out there weren't any beginner talks and they wound up not actually learning anything useful. So a great way for people to get started speaking. Fighting never-ending fires with too few resources 101. Honestly, I'd go to that. How to triage your work, how to prioritize when you don't have enough resources. Yes, I would love to hear about your first lunch and learn. If you feel great about your lunch and learn, then you can submit it somewhere and give it outside of your work. Awesome. See, lunch and learns turn into DrupalCon talks. That's my first DrupalCon talk I had given at a Drupal camp, and I think I gave it somewhere else before. I can't remember, but generally, DrupalCon requires that you have spoken somewhere else before, so you might as well recycle your talk. You've practiced it, you've spoken somewhere else, keep giving it. Okay, so we are at 8 o'clock, so I'm gonna call it on this presentation and sign off, but I'm gonna head right over to the DDI booth where you can hang out and we can continue this discussion, ask any questions, and work on anything about speaking. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you all learned a lot.